Something I'm sure has crossed your mind when watching Death Note, seeing L in action, performing some of the best IQ feats for a more grounded approach in a detective-esque series, well, grounded, is what other cases could L actually solve in terms of other fictional stories. We've gone over L versus the Riddler and how it could possibly go in a world where Batman isn't there to take Enigma on in a cat and mouse game. But one thing that has crossed my mind when watching the new series, Dexter Resurrection, the continuation of the original Dexter series from almost 15 years ago, is could L catch Dexter? For this video, we'll be dropping L into the story of Dexter, working alongside the Miami Metro Police Department for whatever reason you think is the most likely. In the BB murder case novel, which takes place before L takes on the Kira case, we get information as to what L deems as a case worth taking. It's described that L is known for only taking cases that involve 10 or more victims or millions of dollars at stake. Since the premise of the video is to put L Lawliet against Dexter, the most fitting point for L to take notice would be the beginning of Dexter Season 2, when scuba divers make the chilling discovery and alert the Miami Metro Police Department about several bodies found in a Miami bay, linking this threat of killings to an individual the police call the Bay Harbor Butcher. In this hypothetical, instead of Frank Lundy getting involved, he will, of course, be replaced with L Lawliet. L, eventually getting back to the Miami Metro Police Department after they reach out for his help, isn't out of character. Considering L went to Japan for Kira, L's resources will purely be his own intellect. Miami Metro does have some great detectives in their own right, although none of them are quite on the level of L, and more than likely view L as fully capable of catching the Bay Harbor Butcher. Just think of Lundy's reputation by an average detective like James Doakes, but ramped up several notches. Frank Lundy is a character who's been able to solve many cases, and even claw clues on a case no one in the entire Federal Investigative Bureau even thought existed, that being the infamous Trinity Killer. And although he didn't solve this case, he basically took an otherwise impossible theory, which eventually led to Arthur Mitchell being outed as a killer. And even having this weird moment in season 4 where he meets eye to eye with Trinity with no prior knowledge of who Trinity could possibly be other than a possible age range, he notes that he might have found Trinity after a single encounter with a man he's never met before. Although it was just a suspicion, his intuition as a detective is nearly completely unparalleled. And the only other character we see mimicking this kind of behavior is Dexter, being able to tell who has a dark passenger and such, similar to what he does in season 6, where he's able to completely deduce that Travis Marshall, out of an entire crowd of people, is indeed the Doomsday Killer, or at least one of the suspected Doomsday Killers, as at the time he was under the impression there was two. There's even this huge debate in the Dexter community about whether or not Lundy actually knew Dexter was the Butcher. This of course isn't concrete, and there's no true evidence suggesting this, but there is a plethora of things that sort of imply it, as in Lundy's own words, the only valid reason for someone to take a life would be to save a life, possibly meaning that Lundy doesn't even really disagree with the Butcher's antics. It might even see him as an essential force of evil. He also doesn't really seem to care if there's even a small chance that Doakes is possibly innocent, and more so just wants the case to be done and sealed. L has a very different view on this type of behavior, however. The first interaction L ever has with Kira on live television, he calls Kira out for being evil, as he doesn't believe anyone should be able to control who lives or who dies. This would of course extend to the Bay Harbor Butcher, as in terms of who they target, they are extremely similar, with Kira being more out of reason in terms of killing, taking out anyone who even remotely gets in his way. In Death Note How to Read, we get some insight on L as a character, as well as an idea of his general intellect, stating L's ability in 2002 was the equivalent of 5 ordinary investigative bureaus and 7 intelligence agencies. This is during the time of the BB murder case, and then it's stated by the time he faces Kira that the numbers had leaped several more notches. In essence, not only was L's IQ during the Los Angeles BB murder case equal to 7 intelligence agencies, but it also states that L gets continuously smarter as time passes, as by the time he faces Kira, the numbers had increased drastically. Dexter is incredibly smart and practical, with a knack for keeping different parts of his life completely separate. He graduated at the top of his medical school and went on to get a degree in forensic science, but his knowledge goes way beyond that. When it comes to his job, Dexter is considered one of the best bloodstain pattern analysts around. His fascination with blood actually helps him solve complex criminal cases that often stump others. On top of his scientific skills, Dexter has picked up all kinds of other abilities. He's an expert manipulator, a convincing liar. Both Lundy and Dexter saw each other as equals. Lundy even said he was fortunate the Trinity Killer came to Miami because it meant he could work with the best crime scene analyst he knew. On the flip side, Dexter himself referred to Lundy as a worthy adversary, showing that at least anything Lundy scales to in terms of intelligence, Dexter could probably figure it out just as well, if not quicker, considering Dexter himself never reveals his true nature in the light. L's win condition would be to successfully prosecute Dexter as the Bay Harbor Butcher, with no prior knowledge of him being said butcher. While Dexter has a wide array of win conditions, the first being to completely eliminate any and all suspicions that he is the butcher. 2. Prevent L from finding out he's the butcher. Or 3. Successfully remove L from the puzzle entirely. You might be wondering, doesn't Dexter only kill those who fit the code? And while that is true, there has been many instances where Dexter has killed an innocent or plotted on killing an innocent while still staying within the bounds of Harry's code. Dexter does not kill people who don't fit Harry's code. Harry's code is a set of principles that Dexter follows, with the second rule of the code being don't kill an innocent. However, this doesn't mean killing L is off the table. As described by Dexter and even Dr. Vogel herself, the person responsible for the creation of the code says that the first rule, don't get caught, was strategically placed as leeway for Dexter to kill an innocent if it's absolutely necessary. This is his justification for his actions against LaGuerta later on in the series, and although she wasn't going to be a trophy like Dexter's other kills, LaGuerta was going to be shot and killed by Dexter to make her death look like the result of a shootout. I don't want to only compare intellect. Instead, L will be fully involved in the investigation. As such, I believe most members of the Homicide Division would accept L as a great detective, although they might question his unusual demeanor and methods for solving cases. One thing to note is that almost nothing is really beyond L when it comes to investigating, and he is fully capable of making sacrifices, such as when he found out Kira's whereabouts by using Lindell Taylor. Even gathering the SPK in one spot could be argued as a very risky thing, not just for him but everyone involved, but it was a risk he was willing to take. L is a very meticulous individual. Almost anything he observes contributes to solving a case, whether it's a small clue or something seemingly unlikely. He always considers these elements, as he did with the Kira case. When L meets the Homicide Division, he entertains the possibility that members of the main cast, Lieutenant LaGuerta, Sergeant Doakes, Detectives Angel Batista and Dexter Morgan, and even their forensics experts, Vince Masuka and Dexter Morgan, could be the butcher. We find out in Dexter Season 2 that Doakes couldn't even begin to find a trail on Dexter's past. All he could find were his grades from school, the classes he took, and the fact that he looked too clean, according to Doakes and Stan Liddy in a later season. While this doesn't inherently prove anything to L, it does put Dexter on his radar since he opens his investigation to everyone being a suspect, and slowly narrows it down with every clue. A very interesting thing to point out is that L was able to conclude that Light had some form of knowledge on how the police worked, as well as concluding that Kira was likely a very intelligent individual and a school student. Although Light purposely put this in L's face, L was still able to deduce these facts. So when L's new task force begins the investigation, and Dexter inevitably begins to leave his manifesto, which Dexter constructed specifically to throw off the police by using intentionally misleading, convoluted, and even contradictory ideas, all specifically aimed at throwing off the task force. I believe that, similar to Frank Lundy, L would be able to point out that the Bay Harbor Butcher's manifesto and the fact that the Butcher is putting the entirety of Miami Metro in a frenzy by attacking their intellect in the right way, would indeed lead to him deducing that the Butcher is with law enforcement, and definitely quicker than Lundy ever could. This makes Dexter already on L's radar, and only strengthens his suspicion, and more than likely makes Dexter his biggest suspect at this point. On top of this, L typically likes to have every available piece of the puzzle, so any information from Miami Metro Homicide will be directly given to L himself. One batch of information being how many serial killers have disappeared from the Homicide Division's radar, put together with the fact that even James Doakes could put together the idea that Dexter was hiding something. L would come to the same conclusion with much more confidence. Previously, Sergeant Doakes and Detective Angel Batista were able to build a decent manslaughter case against a man by the name of Anthony Rodrigo. However, Dexter intentionally screwed up the blood work so he could kill Rodrigo himself, with the next time Rodrigo ever being seen would be in a garbage bag in the ocean. L, who already identified the bodies in the ocean, would find this information after researching previous Miami Metro cases having to do with these individuals. Since in Death Note, one of the biggest things holding L back was the fact that Kira could somehow murder seemingly anybody he knew the face and name of. Questioning people directly was out of the question, since meeting up in person with the SPK would have already been risky enough, let alone potentially showing themselves to Kira. With this newfound confidence in his suspect, Elle would go to Lieutenant LaGuerta to consult her about questioning Dexter directly. This is also something Lundy does when suspicion of the Butcher being in law enforcement arises in the original show. Elle, having analyzed the main cast by this point, would know how meticulous Dexter is, as himself. Elle has shown having very good forensic skills, such as being able to analyze Kira's notes, Misa's evidence, Rem's notebook after Light regains his memories, etc. He would question Dexter in the same way Lundy did, breaking down his obvious mistakes in the Anthony Rodrigo forensic analysis, and similar to Elle's tactic against Light, he would likely lie to Dexter about his actual suspicions on him being the Butcher. Lundy, in the original Dexter series, actually recruited Dexter to his special task force because he believed that Dexter was truly the smartest, even self-admitting that Dexter is his only intellectual adversary. Though it's never confirmed that this was a calculated tactic because he had a suspicion of Dexter, either way, this is absolutely something Elle would do. Elle would begin to ask similar questions to Dexter as Lundy did in the original, so when Ken Olsen eventually makes his debut as the Bay Harbor Butcher, Elle is very quick to ask Dexter questions about the situation, to which Dexter gives the same answer. This is not the Bay Harbor Butcher, and is most definitely someone trying to imitate the Butcher's work. Dexter isn't very good at faking his emotions in basic situations, unlike he says, but he is capable of putting on a facade that most people can't see through. Elle is not an ordinary person, and pretty much suspects Light throughout the entirety of Death Note, and it almost doesn't matter how many times he, quote, proves his innocence in one way or another, that suspicion is still buried deep inside. Even when Elle was watching Light through the camera he had planted in his room, it became very apparent to Elle that Light was acting almost too normal and doing too many teenager things. The thought of Elle faking his life isn't a thought that would ever fly over Elle's head in any capacity. So Dexter telling the truth about a potential copycat wouldn't dodge Elle's suspicions in any way, and if anything would make him even more suspicious. Something Elle wouldn't be totally against is the idea of planting cameras in Dexter's apartment. Although there really isn't any way for this to happen, Deb does live with Dexter during the season, but pretty much throughout the entire series, one constant is Deb's loyalty to Dexter. So much so that she kind of overlooks many things that others might find a little suspicious. This, combined with the fact that Dexter had literally saved her from the ice truck killer, and later on helps Dexter cover up one of his kills, proves the fact that Deb would refuse to plant cameras in Dexter's apartment. So in Elle's mind, a sibling dynamic as strong as Dex and Deb is pointless to try and exploit. Instead, he finds that questioning Rita would likely be a better alternative, since not only would Elle overhear Deb talking about Lila spending the night at Dexter's apartment, since he does seem to bring it up quite a bit, but having done extensive research on his task force when he first arrived, he put the pieces together that Dexter and Rita have separated. Showing up at Rita's place to question her about Dexter, and in typical Elle fashion, would again likely lie to her about many things, but one thing he would be able to point out extensively is that Rita has a very deep love for her children, Aster and Cody. The thought of something like Dexter being a very dangerous individual, combined with the fact that Rita isn't exactly a hard person to sway, and that Dexter had already admitted to a violent act that is hitting and framing Paul, eventually leading to his death in prison. In Rita's mind, this isn't really something that is out of the question, and although I don't believe Rita would give in fully to this investigation, Rita might give Elle some basic answers, like him being in rehab for a drug problem he had, and this basically tells Elle all he needs to know. Dexter disappears at random hours, goes AWOL, has a deep insight into the human mind, is incredibly intelligent for a forensics expert, and has a past with destroyed records, possibly hiding a very traumatic event that could have easily triggered something inside him at a young age. It's from here that Elle would likely hire someone to follow Dexter extensively, since in this hypothetical the Kira case did not happen. Ray Pember is hired to take the spot. It's likely that Ray would catch on to Doakes tailing Dexter throughout the season, as Doakes seems to only spend his free time vetting Dexter, and even follows him to rehab at one point. Once reported back to Elle, Elle would inform Doakes to stop vetting Dexter. Doakes isn't exactly someone who usually takes a word from people, but for someone with the reputation of Elle, I can see his respect for him being far greater than even his respect for Lundy was in the original show. Since Doakes is no longer vetting Dexter, the situation where Dexter manages to successfully provoke him to attack him in front of a crowd does not happen, meaning Doakes no longer breaks into his apartment and finds and gets framed for harboring the blood-slides. Since Elle has near perfect forensic analysis, the algae from the marina that Lundy and the task force were able to identify still happens, and much sooner. Dexter hears word only after Elle had planted cameras at the marina, just like the original. The camera captures Dexter cleaning up his boat after a kill, But L, being the genius he is, doesn't need anyone to review the footage or even review it at intervals. In Death Note Change the World, L is able to review over 50 monitors at one time, which is further reiterated in databooks as a feat children from Whammy's house can accomplish. This is very impressive considering the WMI, working memory, and PSI, processing speed, required to process this amount of information at this speed to not only hold the information but fully process it all in your head is superhuman, with normal people being able to hold 4 chunks of information at most. Nier is also able to do this, someone who is considered inferior to L and can watch 150 monitors at a single time. So this footage of Coral Cove Marina, even if over several days, could have been easily watched by L several times over before the full time span of the footage even ended. This means Dexter does not get the chance to pull the fire alarm and delete the footage before it is reviewed. This is very problematic for Dexter because, having identified Rodrigo, and with L's meticulous nature, L would have already questioned Lenny, who is a very paranoid and also very meticulous. Lenny had seen Rodrigo being carried into the car and wrote down the license plate belonging to an individual named Charlie Lewis. The car was seized into evidence, and the fact that Lewis's arrest had occurred 4 entire days before Rodrigo's abduction, and his car being seized as evidence, confirms L's initial hypothesis that the Bay Harbor Butcher is with law enforcement. L's suspicions would immediately rise from "it's likely" or "it's plausible" to "Dexter is most certainly the Bay Harbor Butcher," without a doubt in mind. In Season 7, even Captain LaGuerta was able to eventually unravel the past of Dexter and what happened in the shipping container. Although it took extensive research, it was indeed possible to find. So imagine what L, someone who can perceive many times the average person's capacity, could do. L now knows beyond a shadow of doubt that the Butcher is in law enforcement. Recognizing Dexter's demeanor and almost spotless record, L knows his past that possibly led him to becoming a killer, caught him on camera cleaning his boat, and knows he moved his boat during the investigation. Having the information of what happened in that shipping container means L inevitably finds out who Hector Estrada and Santos Jimenez truly are. It's likely that L would plant trackers on Dexter's vehicles, including his boat, and the final piece of the puzzle is that Dexter is tracked going to the cabin rented to Jimenez. The only thing really keeping L from solving this case in episode 2 is the lack of cooperation from Miami Metro Homicide. Since Dexter had managed to build a reputation at Miami, they detest the idea of him ever being a suspect. As such, L, for the most part, solves this case alone from scratch and likely before Season 2, Episode 7. Combined with the fact that L has superhuman intelligence, stopping catastrophes at a young age like World War III, and being able to turn one giant hypothesis, the existence of Kira, into something solvable by his successors. So, could L solve the Bay Harbor Butcher case? The answer is not only yes, but a very emphasized one. L wins. If you want to see more Death Note videos, or even Dexter videos, let me know down in the comments below. Like this video if you enjoyed, and bye.